So use extra, extra virgin olive oil. It's 100% pure, like me.
They buried it, pulled it from the air, and acted like it never existed. One episode of Married with Children was deemed too much, even for a show known for pushing limits. For decades, it stayed hidden, never broadcast, never released. Now, it's back. What made this episode so extreme that it couldn't air in the 1990s? Why did it cross a line that even the network wouldn't tolerate? This is the lost episode they tried to erase, one that tested the limits of TV then, and still raises eyebrows today. Here's what they didn't want you to see. The sitcom that broke all rules. In the late 1980s, American television was dominated by sanitized family comedies. Shows like Full House, The Cosby Show, and Family Ties painted portraits of loving, well-adjusted families facing minor struggles that were neatly resolved in 22 minutes. It was a formula audiences were used to, but it was also one that many were beginning to tire of. Enter Married with Children, a gleefully subversive sitcom that did more than break the mold. It torched it, danced on the ashes, and handed viewers something they'd never seen before. Premiering in 1987 on the then-fledgling Fox network, Married with Children flipped the American sitcom on its head. Al Bundy wasn't a sensitive dad trying to understand his kids. He was a bitter shoe salesman who hated his job, loathed his marriage, and constantly dreamed of the life he never had. Peg wasn't the doting housewife. She was a chain-watching TV addict who rarely cooked, never cleaned, and lived for shopping sprees. Their kids, Kelly and Bud, weren't adorable troublemakers. They were selfish, conniving, and proudly lazy. And that was exactly the point. Right from the very first episode, Married with Children broadcast the clear message: this is not a show about idealized families, but about dysfunction and disappointment, and the kind of brutal honesty in which no one had dared to venture before in primetime comedy. No soft piano music moments, no moral signs at the end, just fat jokes, dirty jokes, poverty jokes, an unapologetic tone that dared audiences to laugh at things polite society pretended not to see. There were a million laughs. The show became a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. It became the voice of a cynical, working-class humor that for many Americans felt almost palpable. Al Bundy's tirades against miserable customers and his one-minute glory from high school football hit home. Peg refusing to live up to an obedient housewife felt like rebellion in disguise. Bud's naughty one-liners and Kelly's blissful ignorance are exaggerated, but strangely believable. And that, their greatest strength, mocked everyone, men, women, children, neighbors, and especially themselves, made the whole program really interesting. But that same sharp edge, which made Married with Children one of the most prized TV shows, is also the sharp edge that made it one of the most controversial shows on television. Critics derided it as crude and irresponsible. Religious groups protested its subject matter. Politicians spoke of it as a case in point of cultural decline. Network censors? They were always on the alert. Scripts were often flagged. Jokes were rewritten. SEQ cut. Still, every single week, Married with Children pushed the line. But a censor, a silent gauge, was secretly embedded within the show. A prohibited guilt line guarded by chaos behind the scenes. They could make innuendos about hooking up and even dirty suggestions. However, if a storyline went too real, too raw, or too uncomfortable, it would surely risk being squashed altogether. The outrage that erupted when the script leaked wasn't just about jokes. It was about what the episode exposed. The episode they refused to air. The episode was called "I'll See You in Court." It was fully produced during the third season of Married with Children and scheduled to air in 1989. Cast and crew had no idea it would be different from any other outrageous entry in the series. It followed the standard formula: a little hooking up, a little scandal, a few wildly inappropriate punchlines, and plenty of Bundy bitterness. But this time, something tipped the balance, and when the episode made its way to Fox executives, alarm bells rang immediately. The plot sounded like a typical Bundy misadventure on paper. Al and Peg decide to spice up their stale love life by checking into a seedy motel for a romantic escape. What they don't know is that the motel secretly records guests through hidden cameras. Later, they discover the videotape of their night together has been viewed, and possibly distributed, without their consent. In true Bundy fashion, they decide to sue the motel. But instead of justice, they find more humiliation when they learn they aren't the only victims. Their neighbors, the Rhodes, went to the same motel and were recorded too. This is another courtroom drama with testaments so graphic that they step into crude misunderstanding and jokes so awkward that even devoted fans of Married with Children must wince. The show runs through the theme of intimate privacy and exploitation, but does not keep a straight face about it. It is all just slapstick from there. Yet, this one came terribly close to crossing the line for the time. The subject matter of being secretly videotaped during lovemaking was not just titillating. It was loaded with legal and moral issues. A long time ago, before social media and viral leaks, when every hotel had signs proclaiming surveillance, the plot hit a nerve. Consent, voyeurism, and public exposure were topics that were seldom brought up in the TV sitcom world. This was different. Even in a sitcom where Peg regularly joked about cutting AI off, the husband was always belittling his customers. Fox was just a couple of years old as a network, still trying to claw its way into the more traditional broadcaster's fraternity. An edgy, countercultural image was the basis of its brand, but it was also heavily dependent on advertising dollars, and this episode was a landmine. Internal memos indicate that a number of ad buyers were uncomfortable with the subject matter. Advertising next to jokes about the illegal private videos just seemed too risky. Not that the network could afford to take any risks at the time. This seemed pretty much like an episode that has been graveyarded. There was no announcement. There was no statement. It just vanished. It never aired in the US, and not for more than a decade was it ever included in syndication, a home video release, or a streaming lineup. For a long time, only rumors circulated. Fans who had heard of the missing episode couldn't find it anywhere. Some thought it was never completed. Others believed it to be completely destroyed. But the reality was that the episode was complete. It just vanishes. And while the jokes could feel tame by today's standards, the outrageous, in 1989, it wasn't just edgy, it was dangerous. Not because it endorsed indecency, but because it played with something too close to real-world anxiety. Being filmed with consent, exposure of your intimate life, losing control of your own privacy. What terrified the network wasn't just what aired. It was what could have happened if they showed it. A sitcom caught in a culture war. By 1989, Married with Children had become a battleground, not just for television critics, but for moral crusaders, watchdog groups, and outraged viewers who saw it as a symptom of America's cultural decay. The show's crude humor, sexual innuendo, and unapologetic cynicism were already pushing limits. But one viewer's angry letter would ignite a full-scale public campaign that ultimately helped doom the episode, "I'll See You in Court." That viewer was Terry Rakolta, a Michigan housewife and mother of 4 who stumbled upon an episode while her children were watching television. The episode in question wasn't even "I'll See You in Court." It was a different installment featuring the Bundys' usual cocktail of sexual jokes and irreverent banter. But what Rakolta saw horrified her. She believed the show was undermining traditional family values, glamorizing immorality, and corrupting young minds. She didn't just change the channel, she declared war. Rakolta initiated a grassroots boycott campaign by writing letters to the sponsors of Fox, urging them to withdraw advertising from Married with Children. Surprisingly, it did help. Some of the largest corporations, such as Kellogg's and Coca-Cola, dropped the show's advertisement due to her campaign. The uproar soon hit the headlines across the country. Television news channels reported on her crusade, and conservative commentators even praised her efforts. What stemmed from personal outrage morphed into a cultural movement, targeting not only Married with Children, but also the very definition of what television could now be allowed to be. Fox suddenly found itself on the back foot. The network had been positioned as bold, fresh, and rebellious because it was still in competition with ABC, NBC, and CBS. Fox had also to prove to advertisers that it was more than just noise, it was marketable noise. A major scandal, portraying this announcement as more filth peddlers, becomes just bad business for the network. Executives were in complete panic mode. In comes I'll See You in Court, with the plot centering around a couple secretly recorded being intimate. And this is exactly the kind of grenade they don't want to be handling. Irony is a pretty good word. Married with Children had already been into its third season and had approximately a whole bunch of earlier episodes that could qualify as really raunchy. Al made some good jokes about necrophilia. Peg openly talked about sexual fantasies of hers. Kelly had been cast as the ultimate dumb blonde and had even built entire episodes around sexual objectification of her at times. But somehow, this specific moment in the year 1989, the aftermath of public backlash, moral panic, and a pretty sensitive issue, happened to hit differently. I'll See You in Court was scheduled to be broadcast in this same time frame. The episode had already been shot and was dropped into the slate before Rakolta's boycott surfaced. Instantly, every shred of cool risk was being re-examined. The question wasn't now whether or not it would be funny. Rather, it was, will we get sued over this? Or will that get another sponsor to pull out? The legal murkiness surrounding the plot, non-consensual filming, sexual material, courtroom implications, was just enough to get Fox uptight. Silently, they pulled the episode from the schedule. With advertisers threatening to walk and public backlash rising, Fox made a quiet but strategic decision: bury the episode. What the cast and crew really thought. Inside the studio walls, I'll See You in Court was just another episode on the production schedule. The cast rehearsed it. The director blocked it. The crew lit the motel scenes, shot the courtroom gags, and wrapped filming as usual. To them, it was simply another day on one of the most outrageous sets on television. But behind the laughter, no one realized that they had just filmed the most controversial, and soon to be buried, episode of Married with Children. In later interviews, the cast would reflect on the episode with a mix of confusion, amusement, and disbelief. Ed O'Neill, who played Al Bundy, once said he couldn't understand why this episode was the one that got pulled. After all, he'd delivered monologues about women's hygiene, insulted overweight customers to their faces, and repeatedly compared his intimate life to punishment. Yet none of those moments ever caused the network to flinch. Al Bundy was far from a genius in Peg Bundy. Katie Sagal reportedly found the script funny and sharp. She said the motel story was completely consistent with the show's raunchy, awkward, over-the-top, but not really hurtful plot lines. From her point of view, The idea of Al and Peg inadvertently finding themselves star performers in an unauthorized private video was perfectly absurd. She felt this captured all that their marriage embodied. It certainly was not glamorous nor steamy. Rather, it was awkward, ridiculous, and humiliating. The meat and potatoes of the show. The episode's writers felt shocked that it received censors' cuts. Later in the DVD commentary, Michael G. Moy, co-creator of the series, recorded how the episode passed through the normal pre-production approvals without warnings or initial red flags. It had just been the pressure campaign from Terry Raccolta and the increasing insecurity from advertisers that made Fox really reconsider. Now, every script under scrutiny involving the executive department kept becoming a legal wrangle. I'll See You in Court became a target not for the quality, but basically because it was a legal liability wrapped inside dirty jokes. Some of the crew even joked that the episode has become a sort of Bundy Bermuda Triangle, filmed, finished, but disappeared without reason, all orchestration. It wasn't just shelved, it was erased. And then, several years later, fans and even some inside would start to talk about the fact that it had been destroyed. Others supposed it had only aired overseas. The truth was stranger. The episode was stored fully intact, but it was purposefully left out of any rerun package and home release. It was almost as if Fox hoped people would forget it had been. And yet, among those who worked on it, remained a quiet belief that the episode would be seen. One anonymous production assistant later told a TV retrospective, "We knew it would resurface sometime. It was too good not to. Too bold." They were right. Though it has drifted with the times, the myth of the lost episode has been woven. Fans have floated shadows of rumors on message boards. Some claim to have seen a captured copy between the hours of a late-night alien telecast, while others insisted it had once shown only in Canada. But these assertions never proved to be credible. Yet it has cast a terrifying shadow, and even the cast and the writers could not forget it. During reunion events and cast interviews, it is always mentioned. Argument has turned into sheer curiosity now, as the norm has been changed on television, and once not allowed subjects are now mainstream. Thus, should it have aired at all? Is replaced by, why did it not? Compared to the kinds of graphic images on cable dramas, or the kind of sexual humor typical today in sitcoms, I'll See You in Court seemed pretty innocent. The Al and Peg story was not romantic or dangerous or glamorous. It was sad and desperate and ridiculous, and that made it as real. And in a way, that made it uncomfortable for executives who worried about it in 1989. But one writer wouldn't let it go. And years later, their quiet campaign helped unearth the episode once more. The secret resurfacing on cable. For over a decade, I'll See You in Court was a whisper in the fandom. An urban legend passed between die-hard, married-with-children fans. A piece of sitcom folklore with no clear proof of existence. It was never included in any official DVD box sets. It was left out of TV Land's rerun marathons. It wasn't listed in episode guides. To newer fans, it was a ghost episode. If you weren't watching closely in the late 80s, you'd never know it existed at all. But in 2002, that all changed. Without fanfare or special announcement, FX, which had acquired the syndication rights to the full Married with Children catalog, made a quiet move. During a weekday afternoon airing, they included a single episode that longtime fans instantly recognized as something different. It was I'll See You in Court. For the first time in U.S. broadcast history, the banned episode aired in full. Viewers were stunned. Some who had grown up hearing about a mysterious missing episode suddenly saw it materialize on screen. Social media was still in its infancy, but early internet forums exploded. Threads popped up on fan sites. People were quoting lines, sharing reactions, asking, "Did anyone else just see that? Was that the real thing?" And yes, it was. FX had chosen to include the long-lost episode as part of its rerun rotation, and surprisingly, it aired without edits. Nothing was censored, no lines were removed, no scenes cut. It was the original episode in its raw, unapologetic form. Response was immediate, but very mixed. Fans were delighted. For them, the episode was everything they expected. This was exactly the sort of crude, cutting satire that made Married with Children great in its heyday. Others were more wary. Voyeurism and sexual privacy and lawsuits for exploitation were the sorts of things that may have felt disconcerting even back in the early 2000s. Strange enough, some felt that the passage of time had made the episode even funnier, while others wondered whether it was harder to digest because of the weight. Regardless of opinions on the content, virtually all present could agree on one thing: it surely mattered. It stood for a time in the past when television dared to tread into zones that were troublesome for executives, not for being gratuitous or obscene, but because they made the audiences uneasy. It spotlighted the shameful truth of how quickly dignity could be stripped away, and how easily a person could become the butt of a joke against their will, all while retaining its comedic spirit. FX was virtually indifferent to the episode, never promoting it or even bothering to explain it in a press release. However, its airing did signal the gradual shift in censorship attitudes by network executives. This was liberating for cable, because compared with broadcast, it had less red tape. The daring yet successful margins were already being brushed up against by the likes of The Sopranos, South Park, and Nip Tuck. At last, "I'll See You in Court" was not out of line. Instead, it began to catch up with the limits of acceptance. But the episode would not see continued life afterward. It was aired a few times before being yanked again because of programming changes and contract negotiations rather than due to public outcry. The new airing was, however, enough to rekindle the fire for a sustained effort to bring it back once and for all. The episode was demanded to be included in the official DVD collection. Petition threads popped up on early fan sites. Entertainment writers mourned the story in retrospectives. Cast members were once again asked about it in reunions and interviews. The interest was beyond question, and the mounting pressure was there. The episode was no longer a curiosity, but had become a symbol, closer than ever toward what networks were once afraid to show, how the culture had evolved, and indeed, how growing voices were calling for controversy to be faced, not papered over, in television history. Sony Pictures Television, the distributor for the episode, began to formulate the business aspects of making the episode available in future collections. But this issue had ceased to be ethical and was straight-out legal. Would disclaimers be necessary? Was any talent to be notified? Were there disadvantages of foreign market advertising? The discussions dragged on for decades. But what no one expected was that the real re-release was yet to come. And it would change everything. Why it's coming back in 2025. So why now? Why, after more than 3 decades of silence, is "I'll See You in Court" finally getting its moment in the spotlight? Why is Sony Pictures Television, once silent on the matter, now embracing an episode they had quietly buried? The answer is layered, but it comes down to one truth. The world has changed, and so has television. In the 1980s and 90s, broadcast networks like Fox operated under tight control. FCC guidelines were strict, advertisers held enormous power, and public backlash could derail an entire series. At that time, Married with Children was already viewed as dangerous, pushing the boundaries of decency, mocking traditional family structures, and making sexual innuendo a staple of every episode. So when I'll See You in Court crossed into territory that involved privacy violations and sexual consent, topics still taboo in pop culture, the network had no roadmap. Censorship was the default solution. You will not know by the time it is the month of May 2025. Everything around became almost entirely unrecognizable in the first place. So then the rules were taken over by the likes of Netflix, Prime Video, If Mercury, and Max. They probably show Euphoria, The Boys, and Black Mirror, but it is more likely that they show elements such as sexuality, violence, psychological trauma, and sexual violence more realistically and unapologetically because it sells. Those audiences are more sophisticated than before, and they have changed their perception from moral clarity to moral complexity in terms of storytelling. So, what was once too much for TV is now more than earned. On prestige streaming dramas and on satirical comedies alike. I'll See You in Court has ceased to be merely shocking. Today, it holds great significance. It portrays a world where surveillance is the order of the day, where issues such as revenge porn and digital exploitation predominate the headlines, where any semblance of privacy very quickly evaporates. Themes that made the episode feel untouchable in 1989 are now the very themes that resonate loudly today. Sony saw this change coming. Backstage, it started preparing for a plan to allow a more nuanced reintroduction, one intended not solely for hardcore fans, but to really alter its meaning. Where they once were embarrassed for its racy content, it is now considered an artifact of culture, an acknowledgement of how far we've come in history, where censorship so often silences not so much obscenity as it does discomforting truths. Thus came the decision for remastering it. The upcoming digital release will feature Too Hot for Prime Time, which will comprise banned, deleted, or long-buried episodes from several legendary shows. However, the highlight of the collection will be I Will See You in Court. It has been cleaned, upscaled to HD quality, and attached with unique commentary from living members of the cast and producers. Included is even a brief documentary taking learned dives into the whys behind the episode's pulling, how the Rakolta dust-up influenced early Fox years, and what the cast actually thought about keeping quiet. And timing is perfect. Today, audiences are not only curious about lost media, they are crazy about it. YouTube channels, Reddit threads, even a podcast or two have been established to dig up suppressed films, never-aired pilots, censored scenes, and lost sitcom episodes. Nothing this hungry has ever existed, nor has it ever had such an appetite for what it wasn't allowed to see. In the aspect of traditional finance, the return of I'll See You in Court is not only a victory of nostalgia, it's a chance for marketing. Sony isn't just issuing an episode to be played again. They're unearthing some long-time suppressed entertainment that is suddenly feeling very important. This then allows the show to intermingle within a society-wide conversation about censorship, consent, and media control, while allowing fans to relive one of television's most discussed families. And I would say, very much, there is also no concern now about any advertisers. Streaming has no obligation toward traditional commercial sponsorship. The episode can sell directly to consumers, no middlemen, network pressure, or moral watchdogs armed with fax machines and mailing lists. What would have triggered a ratings catastrophe instantly goes live via the push of a button. And this time, the episode won't be buried in reruns. It will be front and center, with its own spotlight. Why this episode still matters. At first glance, I'll See You in Court might seem like a relic from a raunchy sitcom that thrived on shock value. A crass, intimate video plot, a few dirty jokes, and a courtroom gag. Typical Married with Children material. But beneath the laughs and absurdity, this episode struck a raw nerve that still hasn't healed. That's why it mattered in 1989. And that's why it matters even more in 2025. Because this episode wasn't just pulled for being indecent. It was pulled because it hit something deeper. Something that, in retrospect, feels eerily prophetic. At its core, I'll See You in Court was about consent, surveillance, and shame. And in a culture that's still trying to figure out who gets to control their image, their privacy, and their story, those themes haven't aged at all. They've only grown more urgent. It makes you think, the Bundys are filmed during a private, intimate time with no knowledge at all. The footage is stored, maybe viewed, maybe even copied. And when they try to take someone accountable, it leads to mockery, disbelief, and a legal system that is more into parodies than justice. This sounds almost absurd. But isn't that the configuration of current scandals out there in real life? From lesser Instagram posts to hacked private photos, from leaked OnlyFans accounts to so many stories of private moments being shared in public without consent, the past decade has truly witnessed the rise of revenge porn. Blame is placed on the victims, on their being laughed at. They're being told that it was their fault they were recorded in the first place. Real trauma exists, but society is still trying to come to terms with it. I'll See You in Court might have tried to cover the subject in humor, but the unease lurked around everywhere. It is ludicrous to watch Peg and Al, characters very well famous for their lack of intimacy, become suddenly the victims of voyeurism. And this emphasizes to the audience just how vulnerable anyone can be when their privacy is invaded. The humor doesn't temper the reality. It sharpens its edge. Laughter does not erase the violation. It exposes it. And that's exactly why the concerned officials got petrified with that episode. It wasn't even dirty. It was dangerous, revealing truth. Not through a speech or some dramatic monologue, but precisely how a punch-in-the-gut comedy can deliver when firing at full volume. Mocked a justice system that has utterly failed to protect the vulnerable. Satirized the innate tendency of intimacy to have become spectacle. Most importantly, it showed how terribly easy it is to experience what would be viewed as humiliation when those who hold power treat one's trauma as little more than entertainment. Today, we were finally prepared to hear that story. With smartphones, surveillance capitalism, and now a range of viral content, almost anything can be filmed. And there is hardly any chance of slipping off camera anymore. Now, Married with Children might not have even conceived of TikToks or leaked DMs, but it does something bold. What happens when even the lowest, most disrespected people in society, the Bundys, are taken advantage of? And nobody cares. That is not funny. That is haunting. I'll See You in Court has another strong association with school censorship. These networks have learned that the best way to do it is not just erasing the conversation, but as terrified as they may be of backlash. In the 1980s, it had been so easy to bury uncomfortable stories, but it had to be difficult for any creative person to try and fight back. Even when it was finally aired years later, it was never primarily the content that had changed. It was us. By then, the audience had shifted. The whole universe had adjusted to the message in that episode. If you want to see more episodes that were banned, buried, or nearly erased from pop culture, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the next video to uncover another forgotten story they tried to keep hidden.